Hi everybody, welcome back to my YouTube channel. This month's video I wanted to do on interview preparation. As consultants, our aim is obviously to make as many placements as we can, but I think sometimes what can be forgotten is the detail and the effort that's needed for the interview preparation, because if we don't prep our candidates well, they're obviously going to be less likely to perform in an interview. I truly believe that if you can become extremely thorough throughout your interview prep with your candidates, you will make more placements. This video will be beneficial for new people to recruitment, but also experienced consultants as well. As we all know, even when we've been in the industry for a while, some areas we may become complacent in, standards might slip without us realizing. So it's always good to revisit some of the practices that we have to rejuvenate them, think about the quality of our work and mix things up a little bit, because again, we can still have more success however experienced we are. What I'm going to go through with you in this video is a process that I have used myself and it has worked extremely well. There may be parts of this that you don't feel will work for your desk or for your candidates, but of course you can cherry pick things that I go through today and use them for your own processes. The day you find out that somebody has got an interview, you obviously get them confirmed, you know they're going to attend. You then have a time period between the day you find out and the day of the interview. That can be sometimes really short, a day or a couple of days. That can sometimes be weeks. What some consultants will do is they will not book in a prep straight away. They will prep a candidate closer to the interview, sometimes the day before. Now, in my mind, if you've got a gap between now and the interview, you want to utilize that time as best as you can. You want to give that person as much time as possible to get their head around the interview. Whatever personality you are, whether you're somebody that's extremely driven or whether you're somebody that likes to take their time, either way, you're going to want as much information early on as possible to feel comfortable for that interview. Quite often, I would put myself in my candidate's shoes. Most people are going to be a little bit nervous for their interview. So the more information I could give them early on so they knew what they were doing, the better. The day you get them confirmed, go through a thorough prep with them. They've then got more than enough time to get themselves sorted for that interview. But also, you're kind of testing them in a way. You're giving them loads of helpful hints and tips for this interview. If you then ring them back close to the time and they've not done them, or maybe not put as much effort in as you thought, you're then getting some intel on this candidate and whether they're worth working on in the future if they're not successful with this role. Always remember, before you start either of these prep calls, to make sure that they've got a pen and paper. There is nothing more annoying than you spending ages preparing your candidate for them then to have not written anything down and be chasing up with you, trying to remember things, to get prompts. So at the start of each call, I'd always just double check if they had a pen and paper to jot anything down I was telling them. If it's a first stage interview, it might not take you long anyway. It could be quite relaxed. For some industries, some types of roles, from the get-go, it's quite a thorough and detailed process. So the length of the prep can depend on what they're doing in the interview or assessment and what kind of role that they're going for. Also, what kind of candidate you're speaking to. If you know the candidate well and there's somebody that historically does a lot of work, you may not feel the need to go into detail as much, whereas other candidates you might know needs a bit more hand-holding. Now, at the start of this first call, give them an overview of the interview, a quick run through of what they're going to be doing. So before you start going into things in detail, they've got an idea of what this call is going to cover off. That way, they're not going to interject with any questions and ruin your flow during the prep. I always like to refresh their memory as well on the details of the role at the start of the call, mostly to recap anything that I had gained from the manager that they might not have written down before, that wasn't on the job description. Because again, if they're going to that interview with a very thorough understanding of that job, with intel that the manager knows they haven't told them, they're going to like the fact that the person's come in well researched and prepared. What I would tend to do then is run through each part of the interview in detail. So, for example, if it was just a CV run through and a casual chat, I would go into more detail on the questions that typically that manager might ask or ones that might come up, the level of research they need to do, just any intel as well on what the manager's like, what kind of questions they tend to cover off, and also what kind of answers they tend to like. Obviously, we want our candidates to give their own answers and it be natural, but just to give them an idea of what they're looking for with this job. If it was something more detailed, I would run through the exercises in detail. So if it was a presentation, I'd go through what they should probably cover off or what the managers usually like from the presentations, give them just some idea on what content they might need to research. I did commercial sales recruitment, so they might have a role play and I can give them an idea of what the role play might be and what to think about when doing the role play, any pointers. And if they've got a competency-based interview, giving them an idea of the themes the questions might cover off so they can go away and think about the answers. With some of the roles that you're working, you may well have placed people in those jobs before. So any intel that you have picked up from those candidates about the interview process is also worth passing on to your new candidates going into these roles as well. For example, maybe mistakes other people have made in the past and not to make this time, or things that people have done well that they've liked in the past, putting them at ease and giving them an idea of what to expect when they go to this interview. You may have already done it, but flagging to them the names of the hiring managers that they're going to meet. This then gives them the chance to go away and research them. They may want to look at their LinkedIn. They may want to see if they can find any information out about them online. If you know anybody that works in the company, flag some names to them of people they could maybe go and speak to find out more, or ask them if they know anybody in the company. So many times when I've had candidates interview for jobs and I've asked, do you know anybody that works in this company? They end up realising they do. Sometimes it's not within the specific team they're going into, but it's still worthwhile speaking to somebody inside the organisation who can shed some extra light on what it's like to work for the company. That research and that knowledge they've gained will naturally come across when they're in that interview. It seems like an obvious thing to do to ask questions at the end of an interview, but we should never assume that our candidates know to do that. Reminding them to prepare some questions to ask at the end of the interview is always worth flagging, because we want them to do that. We want them to show an interest in the organisation. Now, this is going to be depending on the role that someone is going for. I'm aware this doesn't apply to every industry, but for me, I was working with sales reps who had what we call brag files, which had sales information in, their successes, any certificates or awards they'd won. And it was great for them to bring them to the interview to showcase what they can do. Now, if you're recruiting for an industry where your candidates are going to have examples of their work, get them to start putting some things together in a folder that they can bring to the interview with them so they can showcase what they can do and use it as a visual aid in a way. The more time you give them to do that, the better. If you spring that on them the day before or a couple of days before, it leaves limited time with all the other prep they've got to do, and they might be then less likely to do it. What I would then tend to do is get the candidate booked in for a second kind of recap prep, which I would normally do the day before the interview, so it's nice and fresh. So we've agreed a time and date that we're both available to be able to speak in more depth before the interview. One thing I think is very, very important to do during this prep call, probably at the end, is to double check what else your candidate has got going on interview-wise, because a lot can change in a matter of days from you speaking to somebody, and we want to be making sure that we're on top of anything that might take this candidate off the market. So double checking if any new interviews have come up, if so, who are they with, what stage are they at, and what are their preferences from what they've seen so far, what role or what roles are the ones they're most interested in. The good thing about doing this now is that you can flag to the hiring manager anything that may take them off the market. They may then decide to interview quicker or not do a final stage and make this just one stage, for example. So make sure that you're gaining that intel and keeping on top of where your candidates are in certain processes and what they're doing to keep you as informed as possible on all their processes. The day before the interview, what I call the second prep, this would be more where I would be testing the research that they've been doing. Part of the reason for the second prep is to recap everything for the candidate, so it's nice and fresh, they feel prepared for the next day. But part of it was for me to ascertain whether they had done enough work and give me an idea of them going into that interview, how well they would potentially do. I would always start by asking them how they were feeling about the interview, because I think it's important, if your candidate is feeling particularly nervous or worried about something, that you cover it off then to avoid it becoming such a big worry or concern that it affects their performance the next day. Sometimes it's just a confidence issue, other times they need a bit of help, maybe with a certain area of the prep. You're covering off any problems or issues before they go to the interview. And ultimately, the relationship you've got with your candidates, they want to see that you care. They'll appreciate being asked how they feel, and they're much more likely to open up to you about any concerns if you do that. So that's how I'd usually start the call. And then I would just be asking them a series of questions really to see how they've been doing. So what research have they been doing? What do they know about the company from the research they've done? What have they learned about the role? What have they found out about the people they're meeting? Who have they managed to speak to in the company to learn more about the organisation and the role? What questions have they prepared to ask at the end? If they've not prepared any, it's another reminder that they need to do so. And also a bit of a red flag if maybe they've not done enough prep. But again, you can check the questions are great ones to ask and that they're relevant, and it's a recap for the candidate. One thing I used to cover off, and again, it would depend on where the interview was, but I would also check they were comfortable with where they were going, the route. Some of the candidates I worked with were travelling quite long distances for their interviews. And then what you don't want to happen is that they get stuck in traffic because they've left too late, or they get lost. They then end up being late, or they arrive very flustered. That is going to affect their performance. So if it's something that involves travel, checking they're comfortable with how to get there is really, really important. If it is a virtual interview, which we have a lot more now these days, one thing to do is check if they are aware how to access the interview and if they're going to have strong internet signal. Right in the middle of the pandemic, I helped one of my clients run some assessments, and one of the candidates had really poor internet in the room that he was in, and he kept cutting out. Eventually we got him back on, but he was very flustered as a result and panicky, and that then ended up affecting his performance a bit. So really make sure that your candidates are thinking about, are they going to be near the router? Are they going to have strong signal? Have they tested the link? Does it work? To avoid any mishaps on the day. You might want your candidate to take a copy of their CV, so checking if they've printed it off. And if you have talked to them about bringing stuff to showcase their work, what have they decided to bring? Have they printed it off? So you're aware of what they're going with and what they're not going with. One of the last things I do is I double check if there was anything they wanted me to go over again, or anything that they weren't sure of. It could be something as simple as they weren't sure of the address, or it could be they weren't sure if their presentation was okay. If they did have a presentation to do, this would be the call where I would get them to send it to me, and I'd get them to run through it with me, almost as a practice, but also to see what they'd done, to give them any tips and guidance. If they had a role play the next day, sometimes I might practice one with them if they wanted, and I might practice a couple of competency questions with them as well towards the end. If the candidate felt it would benefit them, I would do it. Really important, I would be again checking in on what else they've got going on, because again, there could be a couple of week gap in between this chat that you're having with them. So you want to make sure that if they have all of a sudden put their CV forward for a different job, or all of a sudden an interview has transpired, then you're aware of where they're at with that process. And again, checking in with what seems to be a preference with the roles that you've gone for. Their interview is going to be the next day, and it's important for you to get some feedback once they've been to their interview. So I would usually flag to the candidate that I'd like them to give me a call after their interview the next day, so we can have a bit of a debrief. Some candidates wanted to book it in, others would just give me a ring after whenever they finished, but that was always a good indicator to me about whether or not they were happy with how the interview went. Usually if the candidate rang me straight away or pretty soon after, they were happy, they thought it had gone well. If I didn't hear from them, and a lot of you consultants will know this already, it was usually a sign of maybe something going wrong or them not being fully confident in their performance. So it's always a good indicator of how it's gone. Most importantly, in both these calls, in particular the second prep call, we want to be boosting our candidates' motivation, bigging them up, building their confidence and supporting them. So always wishing them well, good luck, making them realise how great they are for the role. The research they've done is going to make sure they're prepared, and really giving them the belief that they're going to go into that interview the next day or in the next week and do so well and impress the hiring managers. If we aren't able to give them that support and that motivation, then what are we really doing? As their consultants, we are there to match them to the right company and job, but also be with them through the recruitment process and support and guide them. And that is basically the process that I would follow. As I said at the start of this video, I'm not saying that this is the only way you should do it and this is right and what you're doing is wrong, but there might be things that I've gone through in this video that you feel you could add into your own process that might help. For others, maybe people new to recruitment that want some more guidance, this might be a process that you adopt for your interview preps. I'd love to know how you will get on, and I would also love to know any tips that you've got that you've used in your own interview preps that might be beneficial to the other people watching this video as well. So please leave them in the comments box, and if you would like a chat and some help with interview prep, please follow the link in the description box underneath this video, and you can book a chat through my website and we can speak about everything in more detail. I will see you next month with my next video, and thank you for watching.